I really wanted to like this. I really tried to like this. Welcome to Ruined Forever, the series in which I take a look at various things within a certain franchise that have been generally shunned by fans and permanently looked down upon as terrible, and then give my thoughts on it. So far in the series, we've only looked at things within the Transformers franchise, but today, we're taking a look at the Bionicle Reboot. Now, I imagine I was among the many who were incredibly excited to hear that Bionicle was coming back. I was a massive fan of the toy line since I was very young, and entered the series around the late Fantoka period. By then, the series had passed its prime, and all that was left for Bionicle was one last story to tell with the Glotorian, and then it was over. I found it incredibly heartbreaking to understand the concept that Bionicle was over. I loved everything the series had to offer, even its incredibly premature angsty teenage years.
Yo, yo, Paraka! Yo, yo, Paraka!
I really couldn't believe the series was over. And then came Hero Factory. I was a little skeptical at first, but as soon as I saw the From the Makers of Bionicle sticker, I picked a few up, and before long, Hero Factory had filled that hole that Bionicle had left. I grew to love the series almost as much as its predecessor, despite the general lukewarm reception the series received from fans. And then I found out in 2014 that Hero Factory was over way too soon, in favour of bringing Bionicle back. But by then, I had gotten so used to Hero Factory that I had stopped craving Bionicle's return. At this point, I didn't want it to come back, and I had moved on. And yet, here Lego was, finally realizing that cancelling the series in the first place was a bad idea, and announcing the return of a franchise beloved to so many. And so, in 2015 came the Bionicle Reboot. And how did it turn out? Well, this series isn't called Ruined Forever for nothing. While many looked at the reboot in a more passive approach and focused on what was good about it, others outright despised it, and I have to admit for once I thoroughly agree with the latter. The reboot, all in all, is terrible. While the names of the original Toa remain, none of the character or charm that the original had is there anymore. LEGO completely rebooted the entire series, erasing years worth of work and lore in order to start anew. This was apparently so that it would be easier for kids to follow along with the plot of the series as opposed to having to learn the history of previous Bionicle stories. Which is a decision I can understand, all things considered. Bionicle doesn't exactly have the most straightforward story. This is also why the smaller sets are given the name of Protectors as opposed to having names like Solek and Tarduk, so it's easier for kids to understand. The reboot is broken into three main parts, each of which I'm going to analyze. First, we begin with
The king on the loose, nothing you could do, the beast on the move, bully coming through.
One of my biggest complaints with Bionicle was how easily the pieces of the figure snapped, which rendered the figure completely useless unless you could somehow find a replacement part, which wasn't easy to do. When Hero Factory came along, it thoroughly improved this fatal flaw, and I can successfully say I am yet to break a single Hero Factory figure as opposed to my Bionicle body count of 7. The 2015 Bionicle toys used these very same Hero Factory pieces, so at the very least I can commend LEGO for significantly improving the durability of the Toa. However, that's one of the only positives I can list about the toys. While the design of the toys are pretty awesome, the playability of the toys is absolutely terrible due to a number of poor design choices. I'm going to have to enter my serious toy reviewer mode for a second, so bear with me. Those who have watched my previous toy review videos won't be used to me like this. I am aware the original Bionicle figures contained a gear on the back that allowed you to move the arms up and down when turning it, and for the time the novelty was interesting. However, this feature really wasn't necessary for the new Bionicle sets. The reboot toys contain a plethora of armor and weapons on the arms, making moving their arms using the gear difficult and cumbersome. This feature also severely reduces the ability to move around the arms when wanting to simply pose it. It also causes the arms to break off numerous times, and I'm not sure if I was the only one who had this problem, but it was super difficult getting them back on. My other major complaint with the toys was the masks. Once again, one of the original features of the Bionicles was the easily removable masks that allow you to swap them around. And one of the major gimmicks of the reboot toys is the spiders they come with that can be placed on the Toa's faces to make them look as if they're possessed or something, I don't know. However, this means that the mask can fall off if you so much as lay a finger on it, as it isn't properly secured on the Toa or Protectors' faces. So basically, playing with the new toys is really hard. However, all in all, the toys are pretty cool, as they serve as effective updates to the original 6 Toa, and even the Protectors are cool companions to accompany them, much like the Agori before them. On that note, however, the villains of the second wave are just disappointing, following in the same vein as the villains of the recent Hero Factory waves. A generic beast with no personality and a single gimmick that is used as opposed to creating something that requires actual character. The toy line only lasted 2 waves, which is kinda sad, even for LEGO. Unlike the original Bionicle lines, which usually consisted of 6 Toa and 6 enemies for them to fight, the reboot prioritized gimmicks such as the combination of mask swapping over combatants, and as a result the only villains for the 12 Toa and 12 companions to fight are a few generic bad guys and a bunch of spiders. That leaves very much to be desired in terms of plot. Speaking of the plot,
Game on the loose, nothing you can do, you can try, but why? You know you're gonna lose.
as I previously mentioned, the plot of the 2015 Bionicle Reboot is significantly dumbed down from that of the one prior. But when I say dumbed down, I mean really dumbed down. Two mask makers, our good old pal Makuta and his brother Ikimu, created the Mask of Power for the inhabitants of the island of Makoto, who are the Protectors. However, Makuta grew jealous when the islanders preferred Ikimu's masks over his, and so created the Mask of Ultimate Power and went on a rampage and almost destroyed the entire island. Ikimu managed to separate him from the mask, and it, along with the Mask of Creation and Mask of Control, were scattered across the island. Then the Toa show up and go on a quest to find these masks. Obviously the budget for this reboot went into the arm gimmick and not the pay for the riders. However, the plot is reasonably basic, which is what LEGO were aiming for. It still seems like a simple concept that could have been great if executed well. Except it wasn't.
Rock on the street, it's time, tick-tocker. The gang is on the loose and in school locker.
To accompany the toy line, LEGO released Bionicle The Journey to One, a 5-episode Netflix original series that was incredibly short-lived. The show is undoubtedly the worst aspect of the reboot, though perfectly encapsulates all that is wrong with it. A lot of TV shows exist solely to sell toys, and the success of the subliminal message's discreetness often varies. Some shows tell a fantastic story with the products they are advertising, and then there are ones like Journey to One, which is boring, poorly made, and overly embarrassing to the Bionicle name. I have seen all 4 of the existing Bionicle movies, and while they too are aimed at advertise the titular toys, they at least manage to tell an interesting and epic story while still being an advertisement. Journey to One is nothing but an advertisement, with a story so dull that the whole thing feels like an extended commercial instead of an enjoyable show. None of the Toa have any character past a single aspect of their personality, which gets incredibly old very fast. There's no character development, there's no subplots, only a quest for the masks and pointless battles with poorly fleshed out villains. And while visually pleasing, the show is simply just, hey, look at this, the Toa can combine with the animals. Buy the toys. The show perfectly represents why this reboot failed. It sucked out all of the joy that came from the original, and replaced it with lazy marketing and a poor attempt to revitalize a once classic franchise with nothing but names.
The trigger, tracer, drifter, the snake, the beast, the bully, all that makes Paraka.
Now, I've been very negative thus far, and I am aware that many did not hate this reboot as much as others did. The reboot could have been worse. The Toa are still there with reasonably cool designs, and the toys are improved in comparison to the old and fragile ones. It's far from the worst reboot ever at least, and the toys aren't necessarily bad, despite a few noticeable flaws. Overall, it's pretty passable. It could have been a lot worse, and I'm glad LEGO at least tried in some aspects to make Bionicle Generation 2 appealing. The Toa are back in awesome looking bodies, and while a lot of what made their original characters so interesting are gone, underneath their shell a semblance of them is still there. And I guess that's good enough. The Toa Akoto are not the Toa Mata, and though sharing their names, they're nothing like their original selves. It would be impossible for LEGO to recapture the original magic of Bionicle with a reboot. The series began with a whimper, and in both the toy line and Journey to One you can tell this new Bionicle tale was still in its infancy, and that LEGO still had a lot to do with it. I am incredibly disappointed that the reboot was cancelled, because this means we'll most likely never see Bionicle again. I feel as if the series could have been more successful had there been more villains to fight instead of just Storm Beast. Overall, the biggest issue with the Bionicle reboot is the lack of love and care behind it. While LEGO originally didn't have to craft such a complicated tale behind 6 plastic figures, they did, and that's why we all love the original Bionicle so much, and why it succeeded. We felt like we knew these characters, because they were so well fleshed out in background material. The reboot just can't be bothered, as it is dumbed down for kids to the point that it's just lifeless. And even when it's not compared to the original, it just doesn't hold up very well, due to the lack of villains in the first wave and the absence of any character attributed to the toys being sold. And the fact that it was shelved in just 2 years due to poor sales just proves that Bionicle simply can't be brought back. Nothing will ever be able to be what Bionicle originally was, and the people who had waited so long for it to come back after it was cancelled have simply moved on. Though far from the worst thing ever, and honestly overall not that bad, the Bionicle reboot still deserves a spot on Ruined Forever, and so is placed at the very bottom, being the very first on this list to not be part of Transformers.
nothing you can do. The beast on the move, bully coming through. Trigger, tracer, drifter coming through. At the snake that makes Paraka crew. Yo, Paraka. The game on the loose, nothing you can do. You can try, but why? You know you're gonna lose. Yo.